We want to talk today with a nice panelists here. And guys, please introduce yourself, and then we go on straight to the topic. Thank you.
Bob Kolasky. I'm with Exiger. I'm the Senior Vice President for Critical Infrastructure, which means I've focus on Exiger, bringing Exiger solutions to critical infrastructure companies and government agencies that care about critical infrastructure. Exiger, we're a supply chain risk management company. We help do entity level screening of vendors, illuminate things in your supply chain, and work on product level integrity and finding risk in hardware and software pieces. We'll get in the software piece in a bit. When I'm talking about risk for the context of this panel, we really focus on elements of cyber risk, elements of sort of foreign ownership and control risk, and elements of operational risk, which all come together to challenge your resilience and your ability to operate as an organization.
Yeah, thank you, guys. We're living in a very complex world, actually, and it's getting more and more complicated from my point of view. So, first question, maybe to Alan, yeah, and also for the others. What is the most concerning trend actually you see in the area of cybersecurity? Is there any trend you can see, or is it many trends?
Now, when I see the trend, the one I talk about is the adversaries have a vote in all of this, and we are seeing a rich ecosystem of people who want to use supply chains as an attack vector, cyber attack vector, and other things there. And so, the biggest trend that I would start with is that's where the bad guys are headed. And most of my career was in the U.S. government, worked for the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. So I tend to think about things from an espionage and collecting information against the government, but even from working with our commercial clients and our defense industrial based clients, you see adversaries headed there, criminal groups, state-sponsored criminal groups, ransomware. Ransomware becomes a supply chain issue because we've seen, and we'll talk about some of these incidents, but we've seen major ransomware attacks, such as on CDK Global, which CDK Global is a software that was used by a multitude of auto dealerships. And a ransomware attack on CDK Global by a highly motivated criminal organization, ransomware gang, shuts down the operations of car dealerships because they can't do the basic IT data sharing, pricing type functions you need. That's an example of a supply chain attack where, because adversaries saw money there, and what happens within one of these ransomware cases is if they're successful, they're able to collect ransom, other groups run toward the same sorts of situations.
I think most interesting is also real-world examples. Can you talk about some real-world examples where a supply chain attack, for example, had major consequences?
Yeah, so I started talking about CDK Global and auto manufacturing. You saw the same thing with Change Healthcare for healthcare facilities, where again you see ransomware attacks on software that is a business enabler in sectors, creating scale for the attackers to have impact on operations. And so, I start with at the top of my cyber risk list from a supply chain perspective is what's going to bring down my operations, because that's how I'm losing money, right? So I think there's a whole category of that, of knowing where your critical software is. But then there are a couple other categories that examples that are, I've lived through. SolarWinds, which SolarWinds is a software that had exquisite access into government systems, and a supply chain attack against SolarWinds enabled the Russians to exfiltrate government data across government agencies, and really was the formulation of a change of a lot of federal cybersecurity policy in 2021 when the last president came in. So that's another example of a supply chain attack. And then a third one that we focus on a little bit at Exiger is around the code area in Log4j and Log4Shell and bad code that's introduced. And the bad code gets introduced, which means there's a way for that code, in this case that's associated with the Chinese government, and there's a way to exploit that code. And so you need to know where that code is in your systems, your software supply chain, and you need to actively mitigate against that. So those are three that I think are sort of canonical in thinking about supply chain. And as you know, and the answer to the question of are you using open source is yes. Well, whether you know it or not, there's open source code in there, and open source exposes you to potential actors doing things
That brings me to the point, because you said it, and in software development and principles, standards, etc. I see that mostly in large enterprises. When you start small with your startup, for example, you want to build your product, you want to build your MVP. But if you build collaboration platforms or software who collaborate with different parties on your platform, going down, tier down, 3, level 2, 1, it makes sense to have that from the early beginning. Is there that companies really underestimate those risks, or underestimates also the efforts when they build their software or their organizations, their target operating models? What is your experience on that?
Uh, one of the things that my old colleagues at CISA were trying to do was encourage a market sign of something called a Secure by Design pledge, and there are a couple hundred companies, including Exiger, that have signed the Secure by Design pledge, where you pledge to follow certain things in your software development environment, in your software deployment environment. And the idea, of course, is that people look for people who are willing to make that commitment to be secure by design, to put time in there, and then move toward things like self attestation that the software was developed, use the secure software development framework, and things like that. And that's all a way to push and incentivize software developers to take less risk as part of the development, and change the equation of get to market as opposed to get to market quickly, as opposed to get to market quickly, but also securely. Put the securely as part of that deployment. And I think anyone who's got purchasing power over software developers should be asking their software should be asking, was their developers, did it follow secure software development practices?
If, especially when you're a large enterprise client and you're working with startups together or smaller companies, is in the starting point of their business. And is there, from your point of view, or all of you, the awareness there that this costs money, that there is effort behind, and is there really evaluation of this, that we should not really, that we bring the risk topic on a higher level in the organization? Because we always talking most of the time, from my point of view, when it's too late. But what can we do to prevent it? Not just pushing the standards to the small companies, cause there a lot of trouble, and how to manage this. Have you examples on that? How to manage it in a better way?
And this seems like an area of, on the buyer side, you want to put these demands and expectations on your suppliers and ask those questions and put that pressure that hopefully helps create a marketplace. But it's also an area for mentorship and help, and areas where it's to help, you know, bring up the companies that are doing innovative things on the software side in your ecosystem, but help not only set the expectation, but help mentor ways that they do it. I think that can be helpful, again, because this is only going to happen because the market values this, and there are cost-effective ways to raise your level of cybersecurity or software security.
We talk now a lot of and spend a lot of time of the risk and the problems. Let's come to solutions and resolution. I think that is where you guys are both working in finding the right solution for your clients to make them more successful on risk management and cybersecurity issues. And in terms of target operating models, or in terms of approaching those things, and how can companies build a more resilient environment for that, for risk management in a company? What are the typical, let's say, stones or steps you have to do? Or is there any progressing model you recommend normally?
Yeah, so a couple points I would make. One, business I'm in, transparency and actually looking at the risk and study and doing continuous monitoring and asking questions. And as part of that, putting into contract language, these are my expectations for what you're doing in cybersecurity. I need you to report against that. We just had a question on pen testing. You get access to those reports. Make sure that, to the extent you have leverage over suppliers, they have to react if you find a vulnerability, or there's a vulnerability disclosure, so they have to do something with the vulnerability. If there's an incident that impacts their operations, they have to report it as part of the contract, things like that. So use the power of the purse as much as possible. And then the second answer, we've used the word resilience, but we haven't talked too much about how you create resilience, and that we haven't talked that much about how you actually know what the high value assets are in your systems, that if they are impacted, you gave all the statistics at the beginning of a cybersecurity attack. So, there's also a truism that the attack is going to come at some point, and one of your third parties is going to be impacted. Have you studied how, if the third party is impacted, what are the consequences going to be against your operations? And do you have a plan in place to bounce back, to operate under degraded, integrated conditions, to protect information and all that? And that's a key element, sort of doing the resilience planning, to imagine that something's going to happen to your supply chain, and you know how to react.
All of you guys, you working in different environments. Yeah, you building a platform, an ecosystem. Yeah, you are consulting production companies, government, etc. And it's of course, cybersecurity topics, third-party risk is an overall organizational topic. It is in all parts of the organization. But from your experience, I guess a team is leading those initiatives in a company. Are there differences between your business, your stores, and of course we have to figure out the differences there, and a production company and a software company, where to place those roles of in an organization model? Is it near to the CIO? Is it more CEO? Where should it be placed?
Yeah, as a software company that sells around security, you can imagine that we better have our own, we have to drink our own champagne, as they say. Um, you know, our CISO is a business leader. Our CISO has the skills to be a CISO, but sits in the senior leadership, and he understands what he is doing is business enabling. And he goes to work every day to keep our systems secure, to enable business. And the more you get to that, right, we all know kind of that if you're business enabling, you're more likely to spend the money and the effort. And the other thing that we find is, having the dotted line between our CISO and the chief product officer. And so that there is a relationship from the beginning, going back to what I said earlier, first principle, that we have to be secure by design. We have to be secure in our development practices.
Of course, we're all talking about AI in those times and and automation. How is AI and automation is changing the game of cybersecurity? Makes the life harder, I guess. It's or can it also be on a positive technology at the end to help?
Yeah, I mean, AI as a opportunity on the defender side, not just as a risk, is something that we want to preach. And of course, what AI can help you do is gain more visibility and make sense of visibility and see patterns and perhaps get ahead of where vulnerabilities exist there. And I think that's a proper use of that. And then, the other thing AI is good on is automating and making more efficient routinized tasks. And there's a lot that goes on in cyber defense that is relatively routinized in it. So if you can put that stuff in place, you can invest more money on the stuff that's a little more to deal with anomalies rather than the routine stuff.
I have to ask this question because we are in times of AI somehow. But let's see what the future will bring, and that brings me to the next point. When we're thinking about of today for the next 3 to 5 years, do you see some emerging trends coming? Or are there some unpredictable things, or if we would say, how is the vision of your area of the cybersecurity area? What are the next? How do the next 3 to 5 years look like?
Um, Always hard to predict the future, other than things will continue to change very quickly. Uh, what we'll continue to see is we talked about cloud and sort of the systemic impact of the hyperscalers and the cloud security, and the reality that they are, cloud security providers, Amazon and Microsoft and the like, are, the most significant critical infrastructure perhaps out there. And so because of that, they will continue to be targets, and understanding how you're deploying and using the cloud, I think, is important. The other thing we're seeing is a more of a requirement to go deeper into your supply chain and not have um, ICT, operational technology, that is connected to foreign adversary countries. In the U.S., we've put restrictions on people having Huawei and ZT and Hike Vision equipment. Government contracts in supply chains. We put some of those restrictions of Kaspersky across the industry, and across industry as a whole, that you can't have Kaspersky software in your systems. And those sorts of restrictions are going to, in getting more visibility deeper into your supply chain, to attest that you're not potentially exposed to foreign adversary vulnerabilities that are being introduced, is, I think, going to the world's continuing to move in that direction. Certainly as the potential for escalated tensions with China continue to include, and that's one area that I would be focused on.
Final one, I think. When you think going out of the session back for money first, and we're back home, when first step and the first advice, what we can start with tomorrow when we are in our companies, where we have to look through. Have you learned first advice when you think about this? That is the first step you have to take in terms of building the organization, building awareness internally, etc. Any first advice from your side for the audience?
Yeah, ask hard questions. Know what it is that could be impacted. Don't be afraid to go deeper, to sort of do a little preemptive planning or sort of imagining some preemptive thinking about what could go wrong, pre-mortem type analysis, and ask the hard questions of the vendors that are really important, and your relationship with those vendors. Are you comfortable with the security they're taking?
And I say thank you to you. Also, very interesting panel. The experts are here and I guess open for question afterwards. Thanks a lot.